Make sure y'all like, share, subscribe. You know what I'm saying? We got the best content. We got real knowledge, real raw knowledge. Make sure you share this out. Follow Slade the Oddmore on YouTube because this content is being uploaded there. You feel what I'm saying? But we want to give it live to our Instagram audience first. You know what I mean? Like, real shit. So today we're doing the word of the day, and for the Lord of the day, since we scholars, we're going. I'm gonna recite this definition. The word of the day is liberty. Today is 9/9. Shout out to the 9, just 9/29. You feel what I'm saying? So today is 9/9/9 because the 225 in 2025 all equates to 9, but also today is 9/09. So 9 plus 9 is 18, and 1 plus 8 is 9. 9? Come on, it's the divine 9. 06 to the good bros. The day is liberty. Liberty. The word of the day is liberty. So one of the things that we have to, what is really ignorant, is just subjecting people to the term African American, right? We love that African American. That's like such an elementary word, right? I challenge you to describe your people without using the word African American, black, or colored. Try it. What could you supplement in? The Carolinians. So we about to man. Just bear with me. Yeah, man. Make sure y'all like, comment. Please comment. Like, we want to, what I really want for you, I want a culture of comments. Commentary. So law is commentary. What, like during the time of the Federalist Papers, right? Give me 1 second. But so during the time of the Federalist Papers in the late 1700s, that was commentary. That's how law was conversed, through commentary. Law was articulated through like thought patterns through commentary. So the media is actually ancient Kushite civilization. Ancient media, right? So the media was used as a distribution network of information. So all we would discuss was law. And so the word of the day is liberty. And so we're going to, be scholarly. And I'm reading from the American law. It's the American law dictionary. And let's see. Yeah, American law. This is the Oxford Companion to American law. You see the niggas? All right, so I'm about to get into it. This is the full definition. This is page 522. That was my bus in high school. So it says usually used synonymously with freedom has always been at the center of American political discourse, yet its precise meaning has often been contested. The rhetoric of liberty invariably amounts to a claim that some state of affairs is preferable because it maximizes the ability of people to do things that they wish to do. But the claim is used in so many contexts in which radically different assumptions grounding the claim that ordering of it as possible variance is needed before the consideration of the history of America. These variants of concepts results and embody a number of cross-cutting considerations and questions. Is liberty the attribute of individuals or of communities? Is the concept essentially to psychological, theological, political, legal, and symptomatic, pragmatic? Does it refer to all humans, to humans who have achieved a certain way of life, to humans who have organized themselves in certain ways according to certain rules, to members of a particular group or nationality, to people who have certain beliefs, or humans who can successfully make the claim? Is it modern? Is it a modern term or an ancient one? Is it defined by the presence of something or absence of something, that is? Is it something positive or something negative? Is liberty something that we can be defined objectively so that we can agree on its presence after using certain empirical or moral standards? Or is it subjective to the extent that anyone who feels the need to make the claim is not, in fact, free? The answer to each of these possibilities for liberty has been yes. And the various yeses has been arrayed in differing combinations. A brief reprise of some prominent definitions for liberty will illustrate the difficulties as well as lay out the basic claims that have been made in American history. There seems to be a broad agreement that liberty can be used at a minimum to describe the exemption or release from captivity, bondage, or slavery. Liberty is often placed in opposition to slavery, such that the perceived absence of former is deemed the latter. However, freeing the American slaves from bondage did not, in fact, remove the claim that these people lacked liberty. The physical and legal liberty did not constitute a sufferance basis for former slaves to relinquish the claim for the additional changes if they were to be able to do what they wanted to do. That is, the simple absence of bondage did not end the need for something else of perhaps a more positive nature if they were to feel free. A usage related to the moral slavery suffers a similar problem and offers additional insight into the complex of liberty. Many colonists came to America for religious freedom, from which they would easily have defined as the absence of impedance to each person's following his or her own conscience. However, these people did not view liberty as simple as the absence of restraints. For one thing, they tended to believe what is termed federal liberty. One component of federal liberty is the belief that God created the universe with one corner of freedom where his creation does not automatically follow the eternal law governing creation. The other corner of the universe is comprised of humans on earth who alone retain the ability to say yes or no to God's will. That is, God is the sovereign of the universe, grants exemption to the automatic execution of the eternal law for humans. Humans who choose to follow God's law will prosper on earth and will be rewarded in heaven. If not, the contrary occurs. These believers therefore sought to remove themselves from the bondage of sin so as to make the correct choice. The removal of sinfulness was a common goal of those in the community, and those in the community were expected to assist each other in achieving the common goal. As a result, government was viewed as a scourge to the wicked, and the members of the community were bound themselves to the goal of achieving what they could not achieve alone. This positive view of liberty rested on the colonial charters given to the religious people, the charters that included a provision to establish and to run their own local government. Positive liberty was thus associated with an active interventionist government. There are several interesting features to this view. For one thing, it equates sin with slavery, whereas following the restraining moral laws of God is true liberty. For another, it parallels the English common law definition of liberty as privilege or exceptional right granted to a subject by a sovereign power, or an exemption from the law. The colonial charters, each in essence were a privilege granted by the crown, was a privilege. The colonial charters, listen, it was a privilege. It was a privilege granted by the charter, by the crown, to a group of people to create and run local colonies, thus constituted an exemption from being directly dependent on parliamentary law. On the eve of the independence, the colonists would claim liberty in part on the grounds of the common law exemption of liberty granted by their charters, in part of the grounds that because humans have the ability to say yes or no to God, they have the ability to say yes or no to a government in pursuing God's will. Another feature in the colonial view was that it blended freedom from governmental interference in matters of conscience in individuals with freedom of communities to achieve mutual goals associated with running a godly community. Allah. A city, Alama, a city upon a hill. So, one result was to create local governments that were often based on what amounted to popular consent by people striving to walk in the way of the Lord. Freedom was a conscious required that each person to be involved in making the laws or in selecting those who did. And these laws were supposed to aid the members of community to achieve positive aims of federal liberty. Every charter provided for local government in the colonies, so common law liberty was in this instance consonant with federal liberty. The liberty available to all humans was thus actualized only among a people who were properly organized politically. A liberty came to include for colonists the ability to create their own government and control it through popular consent. One important side to this approach was to allow inclusion of anyone who came later and consented to community values, opening the political system to newcomers on an equal footing. Colonists who did not participate in this religious view were still left to another common law notion of liberty, which included the rights of Englishmen that the charters explicitly said, right? The charters explicitly said the colonists took with them. And the colonies originally established as joint stock companies. Inhabitants who owned land were stockholders with voting rights. These were you, Moors. These were you. The Carolinians, the indigenous groups. Okay. Which made liberty, in one view, a heritable possession. Heritable possession. Property rights were strong in English common law, and anyone who owned a certain amount of property who could thus be taxed had the right to vote. A city upon a hill. Better. The amount of property could thus be taxed. They had the right to vote. Whereas in England, enfranchised 8 to 12% of adult males, cheap and plentiful. Okay, whereas in England, enfranchised 8 to 12% of adult males, cheap and plentiful land in America, and led to the same English common law provision, enfranchising 3 that percentage in southern colonies and upwards 75% for the north. For one reason or another, when then liberty, right? Liberty came to include and increasingly came to resemble popular sovereignty in all of the colonies. That is, individual liberty based on freedom of conscience was easily transformed into a political freedom for a community. By the way, this is Happy Hill. Liberia is Happy Hill, by the way. Just the prehistoric name for Happy Hill is Liberia. Man, I'm just reading this off the fly. I promise you I don't know what's written in here. I'm just reading it as a scholarship for my audience. This is for the audience to be aware. It's real scholarship. It's page 523. All right. Okay, let's go. We getting back into it. I promise you, bro. This is terrible. Waku, velo, velaku, velo, Allah, he, Allah. Alright, come on, we're gonna finish this. It's a long ass definition, bro. It's going to page 525 and I'm gonna read it. Inshallah. It's my page and I can do whatever I want to with it. You know? Let's play horse with it. I challenge somebody else to read a longer definition. Not political. Read a longer definition. By the mid-18th century, these various notions of liberty had evolved into a full-blown civil liberty, defined as the exemption of freedom from arbitrary, despotic, or aristocratic rule or control. The English common law notion of no taxation without consent had given way for freedom from all laws to which one had not consented. While communitarian, how many of y'all have heard the term communitarian liberty was the strongest in New England, it had become a common view of liberty throughout Anglophone America, that communal liberty rested on individual liberty did not seem paradoxical as does to some today. The libertarian notion that individual rights have precedence over communal rights. Individual rights have precedence over communal rights was yet in the future. At least that is so real. At least into the early 19th century, it was expected. I could talk about that. So that's all I talk about. Expected that individual rights would give way whenever necessary to the needs of community. Modern liberalism, embryonic present during the founding era, will not reach the full tide until the second half of the 19th century, nor was this development material aided by the American appropriation of the major liberal thinkers such as John Locke. Do you see that? You see what that say? This Constitution? It says the fundamental constitutions of John Locke. Distinguished look at the pen post on my page. John Locke, right? With the liberal thinkers such as John Locke. Man, hold on. Nor was this development materially aided by the American appreciation of major liberal thinkers such as John Locke. Locke distinguished natural liberty, the state in which every individual is free to act as he or she sees fit, subject only to the laws of nature, from civil liberty, where natural liberty is so far restricted by the established law is expedient or necessary for the good of the people or community, as determined by the majority. The condition of being able to act in and desire without hindrance or restraint was commonly termed and sententiousness. Even further down the road was the notion of freedom from the control of fate or necessity, a largely 20th century concept of liberty made possible through scientific and technological development that produced medical cures for age-old diseases, the taming of nature with dams and agricultural advantages, and the expectation that any human ill, social or natural, was susceptible to the manipulation, even to the point of altering human genes. There is still no proper term for this last notion of liberty, but we will here term it total libertarianism, as distinguished from the standard libertarian concern for the minimal interference in individual lives from government or society. Libertarianism is essentially negative freedom of interference, whereas total libertarianism is positive freedom to do almost anything that humans can deem desirable. That is libertarianism. To seek the freedom from governmental intrusion has gradually been joined by a broader libertarian view that liberty also requires freedom from interference by non-governmental services or sources, non-governmental. Put it another way, it gradually came to be realized that behind a free government, there must be a free society. A free society came increasing to be viewed as one where an individual can even pursue ends that had in the past been prohibited by the laws of biological nature. The difference between positive and negative freedom, famously described by Isaiah Berlin, is embedded in the words liberty and freedom. The deep root for the word liberty is found in the Latin term Liberalia, which was an ancient Roman festival in honor of Liber or Liberia. Liber and Liberia were ancient Italian gods of wine that were often identified by Bacchus, from which was derived, among other things, the term Bacchanal. Those who participated in Bacchanals were termed libertines. Freedom, on the other hand, is derived from a word that in Middle German and thus in Middle English describes someone who was in a blood relationship with the head of the household and thus not a slave. Thus not a slave. To be free, therefore, meant not only that one was not a slave, but a member of a community with positive rights, the way a child's status is related to that of his or her parents. Man, oh my goodness. The equating of liberty with freedom mixes the positive notion with the negative. The ease with which negative liberty could be construed with a litigiousness explains why the 17th and 18th century view tended to restrain liberty by placing it either in the context of the common law, to which a limited exemption had to be explicitly given by the sovereign, or by some overarching moral order enforced communally. The relationship between positive and negative liberty has become increasingly complex. The positive communitarian view is that one is not a liberty to break a law precisely because one is at liberty to consent to those laws. But what constitutes consent, and what limits, if any, are there to the laws that can be adopted consensually? Okay, the Supreme Court ruling of one man, one vote is relatively non-controversial protection of liberty, whether viewed individually or communally, as is the move to grant voting rights to all adults. The evolved American notion of liberty requires that freedom be available equally to all citizens. At a minimum, therefore, the rule of law require. It says, I'm going to read this one more time. The evolved American notion of liberty requires that freedom be available equally to all citizens. All citizens. All citizens. At minimum, therefore, the rule of law requires that citizens be viewed as an equivalent to the extent that laws do not distinguish among single citizens. But what if this is not enough? What if government must intervene to create a level of equality sufficient for citizens to be distinguishable in pursuing their respective life goals? And what if pursuit of a level playing field impinges on the individual property rights or the right to be treated as indistinguishable? For example, for the perceived need of positive liberty to assist those living with the legacy of racial discrimination keeps running into the perceived need to protect the negative liberty of those who fear unfairly put upon by government regulations sometimes associated with affirmative action. Positive and negative liberty run into each other in other ways. Are consenting adults free to engage in any activity they wish? Put it another way, to the extent what may government or society restrict, impede the activities of citizens in pursuit of commonly desired goals. Environmental laws pursuing the positive goals of clean air and water invariably impinge on the activities and property rights of those who are perceived to pollinate the Americans have come to the need for positive laws such as these, as well as those regulating food, pharmaceuticals, and vehicular traffic. On the other hand, Americans also continue to see the need for safeguarding negative liberty by tending towards the elimination of laws dealing with sexual activity among adults. The continuing mixture of positive and negative liberty results in the definition of liberty remaining at the center of American politics. Moral standards in local communities based on the positive right of communities to base the government on the majority consent keep running into the First Amendment standards that are now used to protect the social as well as the political liberty of the individuals. We got one more column left. The complexity of liberty for modern Americans seems to result from several ongoing trends. The need for free government to rest on a free society has greatly broadened the relevance of claims for liberty. At the same time, the deepening of individualism during the 20th century makes claims for liberty almost limitless. Using the language of rights that is centuries old on the North American continent, individuals feel less and less restrained in claiming the liberty of engaging in the activity that is viewed positively. Technological advances and the expectation of continuing advances leads to claims that are less and less relevant to form political activity, but to have become politicized. One has the right to college education because without it, one's life possibilities are reduced. Does this include the right of admission to any institution of higher education one might choose? To what extent a threat of injury justify the claim that one ought to be free from such threats? Is the death of 100 people in a population of almost 300 million a justified basis for laws attempting to make such deaths zero? I'll read that again. Is the death of 100 people in a population of almost 300 million a justifiable basis for laws attempting to make such death zero? Is there such thing as a liberty from premature death of any kind? What if premature death or injury results from activities individuals have freely chosen, such as smoking, piloting private aircraft, skydiving, driving on freeways at high speeds, or following unhealthy diets? To what extent must a population bear regulations designed to affect a relative few who engage in such risky behavior? Does liberty, in other words, void all individual responsibility? Increasingly positive and negative liberty, individuals on a group, and political and social liberty collide in the political arena. A person's liberty of expression is another person's slavery to the consequences of pornography, and one person's ability to control her body may conflict with another person's ability to live her faith, that proscribes abortion. The concept of liberty is at the center of American political culture. At the same time, inherent in the concepts that a number of ambiguous have ripened into a growing set of problems without easy solutions. The difficulty of the situation is compounded by controversies regarding as the appropriate protector of liberty. An eglated legislator was once the center of liberty claims. Increasingly, courts have become involved, and many Americans look to the executive branch for relief. In the end, perhaps, it is perfectly appropriate that a free people argue most passionately over the meaning of liberty and what it implies. See also Civil Rights, Civil Liberties Jurisprudence, American, Morals and Offenses. Isaiah Berlin, 4 Essays on Liberty, 1969. Michael Kyman, Spirits of Liberty, Changing the Perceptions of Liberty in American Culture, 1986. Daniel T. Rogers, The Contested Truths, Keywords in American Politics Since Independence, 1987. John Philip Reed, The Concept of Liberty in the Age of the American Revolution, 1988. Mary Ann Gildon, Rights Talk, The Impoverished of a Political Discourse, 1991. Orlando Patterson, Freedom, 1991. Richard H. King, Civil Rights and the Idea of Freedom, 1992. Donald S. Lutz,